Though, let's talk about the grim prospect of winter blackouts. A perfect storm of cold weather and gas shortages could lead to the necessity of organised blackouts in this country. In other words, not power cuts, deliberate power cuts, because we won't have enough power to fuel the country. So areas will be plunged into darkness deliberately in order to conserve energy. So that could happen this winter. It's seriously, food industries, hospitals have been put on warning, put on alert to be prepared for these deliberate blackouts. So hospitals need to get their generators ready, because of course they can't go into blackout, and so do various food outlets and so on and so forth. So you know, as for you and me in our houses, no power whatsoever. Get the candles out. Let's talk to political and social commentator James Melville. Hi, James.
Good morning, Kevin. You well?
I'm okay. So yes, the prospect, it is very possible that the government is going to have to order this winter blackouts, right? Turn the power out, I don't know, for example, in Yorkshire for 12 hours in order to conserve energy. They'll do that all around the country strategically. Now, I'm old enough, I was only a little school kid, but I can remember Ted Heath back in the early 70s, when he had to bring in organised blackouts. He had to close the country down for most of the week, the 3-day week, because there was not enough power. There's not enough coal being dug up, not enough energy supplies. So what happened when Ted had to do that? It was a direct head-to-head with the unions, but he said, I'm going to win this, so I'm going to close down the country for 4 days a week. It cost him the next election. He was defenestrated, de-elected, chucked out of 10 Downing Street. If the government is forced to bring in deliberate blackouts this winter, I would suggest if the lights go out, the government will go out. It will have no chance of winning the next election.
I agree. I think it's very rare that incumbent governments win elections when there's economic crisis, and rightly so, because it's on their watch. It's up to them to provide solutions to avoid this sort of thing. I mean, I remember some blackouts and then power cuts when I was a kid as well. I think we're showing our age. I think the winner of this will be, candlestick makers and paraffin lamps. But it shouldn't be coming to this, because the government, they have enough warning about this. They should be putting contingency plans in place. But there's a bigger picture about our energy supply strategy generally, which I think successive governments have neglected. We have a number of sources of energy, but we haven't got a proper strategy to utilise them properly. And we need to be then having a wider conversation about environmentally forms of fracking. We also need to have a conversation about nuclear power. But we seem to be pushing ourselves into different directions that's led us to this mess. It's a perfect storm of different conditions that have led us to this. But as you touched on, it's not just about the lights going out, it's the supply chain consequences as well of other aspects. So, for instance, healthcare and also food. Because if we've got blackouts, and that's obviously got an issue in terms of the produce and the storage. And so it ends up as a chain of events of not just uncertainty, but other forms of crisis. But fundamentally, I touched on what you said at the start. If there's blackouts this winter, then there'll be a heavy price to pay, not just for us, but I think for the government at the next election.
Yeah, definitely. You just cannot. It has to be that your number one priority as a government, make sure people can still switch their lights on, make sure they can watch the telly, boil a kettle of water, do their cooking, the basics. And if you start bringing in blackouts, they can't do that. That makes a government instantly, almost irreparably unpopular, and the government should bear that in mind. But really, there are international factors at work here. Obviously, Russian power is a problem. The Ukraine war has made a bad situation much, much worse. But what we're talking about here, we're coming to crisis point. This is the culmination of a series of really naive, virtue signalling, impractical policies that have been imposed on us over a number of years now. And I'm talking about, Boris Johnson telling us that green energy can now power this country. It can't. It's not true. The madness. So when windmills stop turning because there's no wind, or when the solar panels stop supplying us with energy because there's no sun, you have to go to backup sources of power. power. Now, we used to have gas power stations. We've still got actually 3 old-fashioned coal-fueled power stations, but we've got rid of all of the gas stations because that cannot be classified as renewable. So we have this place Drax in Yorkshire, which is fed on power by wood chips. Wood chips put so much pollution into the air you wouldn't believe it. But as long as you can classify it as renewable, then that passes government policy. This has not been joined up thinking. This has been virtue signalling, and we're paying the price now, aren't we?
We are. There's that aspect. There's also the kind of cost of lockdowns aspect as well, which has affected so much aspects of supply chains as well. That has to be taken into account. But it's not just about gas. It's about other forms of utilities infrastructures as well. I was reading the other day, for instance, there's a potential water supply crisis as well, considering that successive governments haven't built any new reservoirs for over 30 years. And actually, rainfall in the last 20 years has been slightly higher than the previous 20 years, combined with the fact that leaky pipes are accounting for billions and billions of wastage in terms of litres of water. Yet again, that's another example of infrastructure problems because governments aren't on top of the issue. The number one priority for governments, and it's not just this government, it's successive governments' neglect, is to take care of their own. And that starts and finishes, obviously, with the economy, but with supply aspects, in particular, basic essentials. And we're facing not just a pricing aspect, but supply prices and things like water, energy, food and fuel. And we're not even at the start of this because it's going to get a lot worse in winter. We're facing a monumental winter of discontent. And the blame has to be with the government because it's their job. We pay for them to avoid issues like this and come up, not just with the solutions in the short term by tokenism and a little bit of cash here and there, but it should be long-term strategy, long-term planning to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen.
I do wonder, James, when we became a nation that was incapable of enjoying some nice weather. Now, if the sun shines, it seems to be, the end of the world is nigh, prepare for catastrophe and all that. But, yeah, we do have a drought right now. And I wonder why it is that the government thinks the best thing for it to do, like George Eustace at DEFRA, is to join in the chorus with the water companies saying, yes, hosepipe ban, stop watering your garden, stop watering your roses, as if it's our fault. Why is the government not saying something about these dysfunctional water companies that leak 3.1 billion litres of water into the earth every single day, that spew sewage into the sea and to our rivers, and somehow or other along the way managed to pay their chief executives over the past 2 years £48 million, £27 million of which was in bonuses. What were those bonuses for? Ruining our water system.
Yeah, I mean, that example, which I touched on as well, sums up the state that we're in. There's corporate greed combined with neglect and governments asleep at the wheel. I mean, the water issue is outrageous what's going on there. The issue, as you said, it isn't our fault. It just isn't. It is to do with the wastage of water, considering we're a maritime nation and we get plenty of rainfall, despite the fact some people would suggest that we don't, but we do, because we have a couple of weeks of good weather. We've got a situation here where you can see the argument for nationalised industries, actually, of that. It can only be nationalised if they're run properly. But when you've got private companies that are not serving their customers, charging huge bills and actually not providing the source, and in this case, that issue is caused by them because of leakages and so on, and actually from the government's point of view and local authorities, a lack of reservoir supply, then people again are rightly going to ask, well, hang on here, you're telling us to switch off the taps and not wash our car or not have a shower or whatever, but meanwhile, the problems are caused by government neglect and effectively corporate negligence to show profits. Again, it's enough is enough of all of this stuff. What we want is governments, not just government, but effective opposition to answer those questions, come up with plans, put heavy pressure on the companies who are causing that neglect and high pricing and actually do something about it. Instead, what we have is a 7-week leadership contest to be Prime Minister with candidates who, quite frankly, aren't good enough, and Parliament is on recess.
And the Prime Minister, he's got back now, but he was on holiday. The Chancellor of the Exchequer's on holiday. Yeah, as you say, this leadership contest is the longest-running saga since Crossroads. And I just cannot get my head round the way that these politicians say, these Tories say, oh, well, these are our party rules. Never mind your party rules. What about this country? We're in crisis. Do something.
Yeah, they're supposed to be serving us, not serving their personal ambitions. Part of serving us is, number one, make sure that we can actually function in terms of both the economy and society. And that starts, obviously, with making sure there's effective management of pricing, of basic essentials, and also supply. That's the very foundations of a successful, healthy, functioning country. At the moment, we have got problems stacking up all over the place. We're heading for a perfect storm where basically our functioning form, whether it's food, water, energy, fuel, is either too pricey or there's not enough supply. And the government, they can say what they want and blame it on us and do tokenism measures, but they've had 12 years, this government, to make sure that we do not end up in this set of crises. But they haven't done it. It's not just this government, it goes back further than that, but they're the ones in power at the moment. And it's right for us to ask questions about this. And if they carry on like this, then they will get effectively their punishment at the next election. But the opposition aren't providing much solutions either.
Indeed. Just say this one more time. The water shortage crisis we've got right now is not our fault. It is not your fault for hosing your gardens. It is the water company's fault. Don't let them pull the wool over your eyes. If you believe that, you're being conned. It's not our fault. Good to talk to you, James, as always. James Melville, their political and social commentator.